The word kofun in Japanese can mean excited, but it can also mean sexually aroused. And if you don't study the right way, you can make mistakes like this.
青野は興奮してます。
気持ち悪いこの変態。
Wait, what did I? Kofun? How to speak Japanese fluently in 1 year.
Man, get your ass up.
What the fuck? I'm you from the future. And if you want to fix this...
I have to fix this. In 1 year or else...
この変態。
I understand.
だからもう一回やり直してください。My chin-chin!
This is the 6-step guide to learning Japanese fluently through anime in 1 year. So, month 1 through 3 is getting your foundations, learning your hiragana, katakana, kanji, grammar, and most importantly, 80% of the most frequent Japanese words. If you already know this part, feel free to skip to months 3 through 6, where we're going to be talking about how to actually learn Japanese through content like anime and how to start speaking Japanese. Then from months 6 through 12, we're going to be talking about my favorite part, which is how to make a Japanese brain. And at the end of the 12 months, you will be fluent in Japanese if you can follow all of these steps.
Okay. How many of these do you recognize?
I guess like 50%.
The average Japanese adult knows around 50,000 words. And if you study 10 words a day for a whole year, that would be 14 years. And if you took off the weekends, then you're sitting at 20. So,
But with Duolingo, and if I...
and while Duolingo is good for intro stuff, in reality, it would take you 3 years to get to a minimum level of a beginner. Here's some simple math. If Duolingo is 15 minutes per session and you do that every day with no breaks, it would take you 3 years to get to 250 hours of exposure, which sets you at the absolute minimum level of proficiency, which is why Duolingo was never gonna get you there. And I know you wanna get this done in a year, so let's get real about the foundations and get started on how we're actually gonna learn Japanese, okay?
Okay.
Kiso.
Hiragana is for reading Japanese words. It's their version of the alphabet. And katakana is for reading foreign words. So essentially you can think like konnichiwa, daisuki. All of those are going to be written in hiragana because those are native Japanese words. Whereas katakana for foreign words like toire or yes, smartass, like makudanarudo. I was expected in language school whenever I was learning Japanese to learn this in 1 week. So if you just use this Enki pack that's going to be listed here, get that done in 1 week and let's move on to the real sauce.
Okay, hiragana, katakana. What about kanji though?
Okay, now let's talk about kanji, because there is a way of learning kanji that is very highly regarded online. And I think we definitely have to talk about it because I know you have questions. So when you try to learn the kanji, which is actually Japan got from China when they were studying Buddhist texts and ancient religious texts, they actually took Chinese kanji and applied that kanji to their own words using the picture-like symbols of kanji to describe their meaning. So in Japan, you need to know it fundamentally at least 2,200 kanji to be considered business fluent and to take the N2, etc. That's what you're expected to know. So if you're trying to study Japanese, how much should you pay attention to kanji? And that's a great question. Knowing kanji will literally up your game and shave off an insane amount of hours. Then that begs the question of how can we kind of shortcut? And that's through this method called RTK, which stands for Remembering the Kanji, which was created by James Hasig, which is a famous methodology in which you're learning the meaning of the kanji through its picture form, or like the way that it looks, but not learning necessarily the Japanese word.
So for instance, in this example, you have mountain and you understand that that means mountain, but you don't necessarily know that word yama there, and that's fine. RTK's whole goal is just to teach you how to begin recognizing what the kanji is. And that makes it easier for when your brain only has to process the word and not also the kanji. You're not learning two things at a time, you're learning one thing. So that's the whole point of RTK.
Separately, what you're gonna do is you're gonna get a beginner Japanese textbook, and I would recommend Take Him Grammar Guide, which you can also find on Anki, which is already made into grammar points for you. But you wanna study that around 15 minutes per day, because you don't wanna spend most of your time studying grammar. But what you need to understand is that grammar is what's working behind the scenes, and it's not the fundamental thing that we understand when we learn languages. Babies don't study grammar first and then learn to begin constructing sentences. But it is important, and it can speed up your lens or how quickly you can kind of determine what's going on in situations if you have a fundamental understanding of grammar. So spending around 15 minutes per day here is going to be the key.
Input.
This is the most important part. So your animes that you're watching at home, you want to start watching them with Japanese subtitles in Japanese. And in the beginning, you're going to understand literally nothing, or maybe a little bit, and you'll begin to get better and better depending on where you're starting and where you are now. This is where it really begins to shift, because you have the traditional study and you have the immersion approach. So study hours in the traditional sense are more focused on memorizing rules, whereas study hours in immersion are more focused on acquiring language through context. Eventually, if you know a broad amount of stuff, things will become more perceptible to you, just like when you learn language when you were a baby.
80% rule.
This is like Naruto or Sasuke. Before they could really develop in the story, they need their Chidori, they need their Rasengan. You know, you need your Kamehameha. What you're gonna do is you're going to learn the most frequent or the most common Japanese words. You won't be fluent, but Japanese will suddenly seem a little bit more accessible.
And that is due to the Pareto principle. Essentially that 80% of your results come from 20% of your effort. In Japanese, it's even crazier. Despite the 50,000 words, 1,500 words are going to give you the most frequent words. So once you have the 1,500, it gets really fun and you can actually start studying anime. But let's talk about how to learn the 80% first.
And here's how you do it. You have two paths. You can go absolutely from scratch, and it's 100% free. And this is what I would recommend. You go on Anki, and there's a deck. You're gonna be studying around 1,500 words, give or take. And I know that sounds like a lot of work, but with only 10 words a day, you can do it in less than 6 months. And if you do 20 words a day, you can literally get it down in 3 months. The sooner you get a solid base to understand the language, the sooner you can begin exploring and doing more in the language, making the whole process easier. And that's gonna be done and already made for you in this deck, right? So you can check this one or this one. Then we also have the paid route, a sponsorship from Migaku. They have a course that combines the most common grammar points and the most common Japanese terms all in one. And you can also be ready for your sentence mining when that opportunity shows up. If you want that, that is something that a future me did do at some point.
Okay, so you're telling me I learned 80% and then I'm done. And then who cares? I don't need the 90%. I can speak 80% of Japanese, no problem, right?
No. The 80% is just the framework. Stage 2, we move to comprehension. This is where you need to expand your vocabulary rapidly. An extra 3,500 of the most common words makes up that additional 10%, which gets you to 90%.
5,000? It's over 5,000!
Imagine you're talking to your girlfriend and she sends you a text and she says, 私は昨日公園で彼に If you only know the top 80%, you only know 私、昨日, yesterday, 公園、彼に. You don't know the key terms, 偶然であった, which means I met him by accident. You're like gonna be there freaking out like, what did you guys do? Wanting to basically crash out on your girlfriend. And this will happen everywhere. That 20% that is missing is what tells you what actually happened and how it happens, which is what we refer to as information dense words, nouns, specific verbs, adjectives that carry the meaning. And without them, the sentence is a vague collection of I, yesterday, park, him, and particles. So how do you fix this? And you do that through what we call sentence mining.
文のマイニング. In this goal, what you're going to be doing from now on is every day while you're watching your content, you're going to be making 20 flashcards of sentences from the animes you're watching. And that is called sentence mining.
This is where a lot of key learning comes in. You should wait until you at least have a foundation of 1,000 to 2,000 words for maximum efficiency. You can obviously start sooner, but you're gonna have to look up so many words while you're watching stuff that it can be more cumbersome than actually beneficial. In this immersion process and when you're doing your sentence mining is the concept of +1.
+1 content. Why is that important? +1? Why not +2, +3, +4? I mean, at least +2.
+1 means that you're literally looking for material that is just one level above your current understanding, right? Yeah. So when you encounter a sentence where you know 10 out of 11 words, your brain can instantly grasp the meaning of the 11th word once you look it up. For instance, the cat quickly climbed the new word. Because you know cat quickly climbed, you know the new word must mean something that you can climb on, like a tree or a fence. So the context does 90% of the work for you. Number two, your efficiency and retention will go up. Mining a sentence with only one unknown word is highly efficient. In terms of better retention, when a word is learned in a clear, comprehensible context, you're gonna form a stronger connection and it's less likely to be forgotten. Number three, if you have to stop and look up words all the time, 3 to 4 words every sentence, it's gonna break your flow and it can potentially lead to mental burnout. I know it has for me. So +1 is gonna keep things enjoyable while reserving your intensive immersion time only for finding those perfectly clear sentences.
Got it. Got it.
Which brings me to talking about your intensive immersion and you have free flow state immersion. So here are the breakdown of the 2 types of active immersion and how they're gonna fit your 20 card goal. Because remember, you're going to be learning 20 cards a day. If you really have to push back, it's 10, but you're trying to learn this in a year, right? So intensive immersion, when you're sentence mining, you're going to pause frequently, look up unknown words, and create new cards. This is where you're gonna acquire new high-value vocabulary cards for your 20 cards a day. This is where you're gonna get them from. Whereas free flow immersion is when you're in a flow state. You're gonna be watching and reading without stopping. If you really wanna know something, you can occasionally look things up and that's okay, but you wanna avoid breaking the flow here because you're just trying to acquire the linguistic instinct to build familiarity automatically to understand things instantly. So a lot of you are gonna feel like, oh, but I didn't understand that sentence, or it can feel frustrating to follow along. So yeah, you can look things up, but just understand that's a part of the process and you can get around this by consuming something and then later going back to understand the meaning because stories are very important. Okay, so the Q&A, the comfort, fun threshold for immersion. When will you get to the point that immersion is enjoyable and not just work? The bare minimum, when you have 80% comprehension, you're gonna constantly looking up things to mine. The experience is tiring and can lead to burnout and sometimes plateau. But you push through this. Once you start getting closer to 5,000 to 10,000 words, you can pretty much read a page or a novel or an episode of a show and only encounter sometimes 1 to 2 new words, depending on what you're watching, right? If you're watching Attack on Titan or Jujutsu Kaisen, it's gonna be crazy. But Dragon Ball Z, very doable. And eventually, once you watch all of Jujutsu Kaisen, maybe there's 200, 300 new words. You bang, you get through those, then you fully understand it. So you just kind of tackle one thing at a time, right? So that's my tips about getting through the frustration of the immersion phase and kind of the threshold of when things become a little bit more, feels less like work and more enjoyable. Now you know what immersion is. We're going to talk about controlled output because after a couple months of input, you're gonna feel a weird pressure to speak.
Yeah, I definitely want to talk to people as soon as I can. You know, that's what makes it worthwhile. Right?
And that's your brain asking for output. Just know at this end of the day, mistakes equals progress. So when you're speaking to Japanese people, don't be afraid to make mistakes. You can expect real life situations like this. This is actually based on a true story.
大丈夫？
はい、大丈夫です。
シェイプしますか？
まあ、乳首以外だったら、
乳首？
乳首以外。
乳首シェイプ。
乳首以外。
ニップルね。ニップル。
首。はい。じゃあ、首。はい。
オッケー。
すみません。バカ外人。
Oh my gosh, chikubi, tokubi. Actually, I didn't really know that. I mean, that's a good thing you saved me all that trouble, or maybe I'll still have to go through that.
Yes, that is real. I did not make that up. This is one of the funniest parts, the best parts, the weirdest parts about speaking a new language, and also Japanese is you're gonna go through times like this completely fine. For me, it's very rewarding. I love speaking. It made me wanna learn it more. But everybody has their approaches. If you just want to focus on immersion first, you can do that. But for me and for you, you already live in Japan. Or for some of you potentially at home, you might be in a situation where you have Japanese people around. So there would be no need for you to wait. And in my case, I couldn't wait. And also it became like a self-fulfilling sort of flywheel where it just felt better and better. The more I studied Japanese and I did my flashcards, some people would come back and be like, your Japanese has gotten so much better. But if you want to start speaking early, you can use tools like italki, HelloTalk. I've heard that those are good resources. So that's my thoughts on speaking. But anyways, speaking had to be talked about so we can get to a very, very critical part. This is what's going to separate people who actually get fluent. From here on, this is where we're going to be focused on creating a Japanese brain.
Have a Japanese brain?
Okay, so next we're gonna get into basically the craziest concept of this video, and where this is something I don't hear a lot of people talk about enough, which is creating a Japanese brain. This is where they all are going to begin to feel like, whoa, could have been raised in Japan for a little bit. Eventually, English is going to stop helping you in this process. It's time to ditch the English dictionaries and use Japanese to learn Japanese. In reality, you want to start defining words in Japanese. This is how you actually begin to approach fluency. Why is this transition necessary? You need to eliminate false associations. When you define a word as a Japanese word equals an English word, you're creating already a translation bridge, which leads to unnatural usage sometimes in your head and misunderstandings, because in some cases, no two words perfectly align in language, right? So essentially you're gonna run into one problem here when you try to do this, which is called dictionary domain vocabulary, because the words that are used in a dictionary to define other words are quite different from common spoken Japanese. So for instance, if you look up the word from earlier, guzen, right? You're gonna get this on screen, right? So say you don't know the words ito, yoki, or dekigoto, right? Essentially, you're going to have to look up those words back in the bilingual dictionary. You're gonna have to look up the words you didn't know from the dictionary, and those are gonna give you 3 to 4 really high value Japanese words. For these new words that you've learned, you're going to create sentence cards out of them in the same way that you're mining your other material. I think it's going to be around 300 words. It could be more than that, because eventually you're going to use these words that are commonly used in the dictionary to redefine other words in Japanese. So now you're going to begin to actually gain the ability to start to define Japanese concepts in Japanese. That is crazy. And that is when you're actually doing something. And that's what I'm trying to do next. So next we're going to talk about the second part of acquiring a Japanese brain.
I'm gonna have to learn how to read in Japanese. I can't, no, reading is insane. Like that's crazy.
Reading is going to be one of your most efficient sources for intensive immersion, because you can control the speed and easily isolate a single sentence.
That sounds like a real challenge. And
Number 1, you need to identify the target material. Choosing reading material that is slightly difficult, meaning you should recognize around 80 to 90% of the words on the page. So for beginners, you're gonna have your graded readers, NHK Web Easy, simple manga, and then you're gonna go to intermediate, you're gonna have light novels, video game scripts, or web articles. And then from there, obviously just full-on books. Just like in English, there's gonna be a lot broader of a vocabulary base that is not usually used in spoken word. The books are gonna feel like the most miserable and difficult process ever, because you're not gonna have pictures, you're not gonna have music, you're not gonna have people's faces to tell you what's going on, and you're going to feel you're gonna feel pretty much screwed. Fuck. But the thing is, there's so much value in this, because you're going to be able to use language to build images in your mind. And so when you go through your first book and your second book and your third book, it's gonna feel like hell every time, but it's gonna get a little bit better each time. And as someone who's went through one book versus someone who went through 5 versus someone who went through 10, you're gonna feel completely different, and it's going to get easier. So reading, I encourage you guys to look into this further once you get to this point when you really wanna begin to feel fluent in the languages. You should be able to read a couple books. That's kind of my last 2 tips, my last kind of icing on the cake, is you want to begin to define words in Japanese, and then you want to read books in Japanese. That is where language acquisition starts to really take an insane velocity, because you're not getting those extra keys through the images, through the music, through the sound. You're just going based on pure words.
Now let's see exactly what happened when you put all these steps together.
久しぶり。
久しぶり。
今日はちゃんと日本語話せる？
まあ去年はごめん。でもこの間1年ぐらいずっと日本語を勉強してきた。だからもう一回やり直してください。
去年はちょっと変態っぽかったけど、今はかっこいいかも。
付き合わない？
はい。
行く？
So let's talk about some of the biggest mistakes that I see in this language learning is you study only when you're motivated. Definitely avoid doing that. Number 2, you try to memorize everything early on, all these grammar patterns, kanji. You get so obsessed with memorization that you don't immerse in the language. Number 3, you think textbooks equals fluency. Number 4, you're scared to sound dumb, and so you just don't talk or you don't take risks. You feel unsure. It's gonna feel like you know so much, and then you're gonna read something and make you feel like you don't know anything. But that is totally a part of the process. With that being said, in the description, I'm curious about maybe having a community and you want a place to, someone to hold you accountable. I'm interested to know if anyone is interested in that, as this year I'm trying to push to up my reading comprehension. My listening to Japanese is pretty much fluent and at an N2 level, and it has been that way for about 1.5 to 2 years. So make sure to go down and you can put your name in this forum, or I don't know, I'm gonna have some way to show that you're interested. Anyways, coming up next, I'm gonna talk about things like, can learning Japanese actually help your dating life in Tokyo? Asking for a friend. Gen Z dating in Japan, how is that changing? The cost of living in Japan, what is it like living here? All these sorts of things that I think can be really interesting about life in Japan. So if that resonates with you, I wanna know what you guys wanna know more about. And I also wanna know what you guys' thoughts were. So thank you. Make sure to hit that button below. Peace.